We have as our speaker James Grimaldi, a senior writer at the Wall Street Journal and one of the absolute best reporters in the business on finding the money, following the money, finding out what's going on Capitol Hill. In 2006, he and two colleagues won the Pulitzer for investigative reporting for exposing the Jack Abramoff lobbying scandal. He's won a bunch of awards for other investigative projects. He has also won the National Press Foundation's Dirksen Award for Distinguished Reporting of Congress. He won that from us, I think, 2 years ago. He's also a past president and board member of IRE and is currently on the board of the Fund for Investigative Journalism. So he's got the creds for investigative reporting. I've asked him to come talk about how to find the money and the connections on Capitol Hill. In general, the lessons that he's learned and the tips he's had from his long career covering those kind of things, and any specific tips on COVID coverage. But this is more general about how he can find things on Capitol Hill in terms of members and their holdings and things like that. So it is 11:55, and we have James for 45 minutes until 12:40, and so I'll turn it over to James.
Great, thanks for inviting me. So I'm going to do a relatively short presentation so that we have plenty of time for questions. I know that we've got a whole variety of folks here who have different skill sets. Some people could teach this class, and there are others who are probably just learning how to cover Congress from remote, maybe for the first time. So I beg your pardon if some of this stuff is a little obvious if you already knew it, but these are some of the tools that I use every day. So let's start with the basics. Which I think it kind of go without saying. In some ways, it's what you would learn in your civics class. You want to find everything you can about your lawmaker. You want to follow, understand what their profile is, what their committee assignments are, what their issues are, or what caucuses they might belong to, and then what legislation they might be entering. And a resource that you should use if you're not already is congress.gov, where you can track legislation and votes. There are a lot of other websites that help you parse that, since congress.gov includes everything. When they created that, they first called it Thomas. It was something created back by Newt Gingrich when this new thing called the internet was available to everyone. They recently rebranded it a few years ago to congress.gov, and it's an invaluable resource. A lot of times I will find that when I'm doing Google searches, a lot of what I'm looking for will not come up in a Google search that can be found on congress.gov. I recently did a story about a top official at the Health and Human Services, and he had worked previously for Senator Burr, and his name actually, and he'd been nominated for several positions. A lot of that information about him, including some testimony by him, popped up by going to congress.gov, and you didn't find it by a basic Google search. The other tool I use is a reference to your last speaker who taught me a lot about what I know, which is Sheila Krumholtz from Open Secrets. And I assume since she was just on that you got a little bit of a tour possibly, or perhaps about what you can find there. But it's always, I frankly will go there first before I'll even go to congress.gov to get a look at a profile of a member of Congress. You can see where their money comes from, all their assignments, a nice little rundown of their legislation, as well as their personal financial disclosure, which I'll talk about in a minute. You also want to make sure, of course, you look at their own website. And a lot of members will not only have their official website, but they'll have a political website. The political website is usually only active when they're in cycle or they're actively running. So senators might not update them, but every 6 years. Members of the House might update them more often because it seems like they're in a constant run for office. And then a couple other places, I don't know if you folks have heard about this, that I use. One is Legistorm, and sometimes I also use CQ Moneyline. Now, both of these are subscriber type services, but like anything that you see online that are a subscriber type service, you often can use them as a guest. If you email the owners of the website, they'll often send you a 2-week trial. So if you're doing a deep dig on any member of Congress, I would advise also looking to see what you can find on Legistorm. So campaign finance, again, I think you probably got a nice briefing from Sheila on what you can find. I will say that Open Secrets used to be really something you couldn't live without, but I will say now that fec.gov is a better website than it has been ever and is pretty usable. Follow the Money, many of you may already know because that's something that does both state and federal. I find it to be a little bit of a clunky website in terms of searching, but it's invaluable. It has a lot of information. Will often have a lot of lobbying money depending on what's disclosed in your state. CQ Moneyline, of course, I mentioned a minute ago, and they used to be FEC Moneyline, created by a couple of former Federal Election Commission employees, and then later sold to CQ. Tony Raymond is one of the founders of that. So we're going to talk a little bit about ethics disclosures, and then I hope to sort of show you an example of how you can use these. If you're not already doing this, you want to make sure that you are always looking at the financial disclosure reports that for whatever member you're covering. So of course, if you're covering states, that might be available through your Secretary of State or an ethics commission. And at the federal level, it's the Office of Government Ethics. If it's a federal office holder, or if it's a member of Congress, it's the US Congress, the Clerk of the House, or the Secretary of the Senate. Now, I often can navigate to those actual documents from Open Secrets, and that makes it an easy way to do it. So you've gotten that summary of exactly who the congressman is, what they represent and their issues, and then you can click on personal finances and it will take you straight to either the Clerk of the House report or the Secretary of the Senate report. Now, what do you do with this information? Well, there's a variety of things that you can do when you're looking at these members. You can be doing something like a basic feature. Anytime you're doing a profile or writing about someone running for office, you should make sure you're looking at all of these entities that you have, that you're not just going by what the campaign gives you, but you're looking at what do they actually do in Congress, how many bills have they actually sponsored. As you may know, most members don't really get to sponsor bills. That's usually done by the chairs of the committees. Unless they're in a tight race, sometimes the chair of the committee will let them be a primary sponsor in order to sort of bolster their reelection bid. You should make sure you know and you're telling your readers where the money's coming from, because often the money will be an indication of what their interests are. If they're on the House Financial Services Committee or the Banking Committee, they're likely to be getting money from financial entities, brokers, dealers, or bankers. That's worth noting. It's not necessarily a quid pro quo, but I think it's something informative to your readers. When you do that, you want to make sure that you're looking at the patrons. These donors will give you an indication of how they're performing. And the patrons not only will be a member, someone who's made a campaign contribution, but they might also make a contribution to a favorite charity of the lawmaker. Now, one of the things that you can find on the Clerk of the House reports is any donation that's made. Now, if they make a campaign contribution, that also has to be disclosed to the Clerk of the House, but also if they make a gift to a charity on behalf of a member of Congress, say the Boys and Girls Club, that will be something that needs to be reported if they're a lobbyist, and that those records are often overlooked. You want to look at the conflicts of interest, of course, that would somehow compromise their work. So as you see, as we're going down this list here, we go from having something that would be valuable for a basic profile to something that may actually be of an ethical question. So you want to look and see from the financial disclosure reports where, say, a spouse is working, or if a spouse is working for, say, an airplane manufacturer like Boeing, and the person happens to be on a committee that would fund Boeing, somehow provide military purchases for Boeing, that would be an interest that would, something that might be worth looking at. Sometimes it can get even more minute than that. Maybe they're working for a major donor who has interest before the House, and that the lawmaker may have even introduced legislation on their behalf, which could lead to an ethical violation or a violation of law or policy. So this is your spectrum of stories of things that you're looking for. And of course, the ultimate sort of thing you're looking for, did they actually make a donation or give a gift in exchange for actual action? Sorry about that, my headphones are coming in and out. Actual official action, that's known as bribery. You can't give someone a gift in exchange for an official action that's against the law, and certainly would be worth writing about. So synthesizing your research. How do you do that once you've gathered all of this information? You want to look for themes and patterns. Like I said, are they on the finance committee, and are they getting money from financial institutions? And does maybe the spouse work for a financial institution? What kind of legislation are they introducing? And is that legislation beneficial to the donor? You want to also look for a cause and effect by building a timeline. So anytime I'm doing a story about any lawmaker, I'll build, or frankly, anyone, any story I do now, I do a timeline. And it may even begin with the birth, because you want to know what day they were born, and so you'll know their age, where they went to college, where they may have had developed friendships, where they had jobs before they went into office. And so you often will find that when you put things into a timeline, that you'll see a cause and effect. Maybe they introduce a piece of legislation that seemed to benefit a particular donor right after the donor gave a donation to the campaign, or may have even thrown a fundraiser on behalf of that lawmaker. The next thing you want to think about doing in this list of activities is compare and contrast. So you may have a list of data like campaign contributions that you would want to compare maybe to another set of data. So for example, when I was looking at Hillary Clinton 4 years ago, we were able to look at all of the donors to the Clinton Foundation, because those were released by the Clinton Foundation on a website. Not in a very easily searchable form, so we had to scrape it and put it into our own database. But then we also looked to see what Hillary had done on behalf of many of those donors when she was at the State Department. And in her book, she actually talked about doing favors, for example, for Boeing. And after Boeing had given a large donation to the Clinton Foundation, Hillary actually bragged in her book about having done a favor by trying to sell some planes to Aeroflot over in Russia. And the timing of that was really pretty close. Earlier in my career, we looked at George W. Bush and all of his fundraisers. He had fundraisers called Pioneers and then Rangers. If they raised 100,000, they were a Pioneer, and if they raised 250,000 for his reelection bid, he was called a Ranger. And we compared and contrasted that with lists of appointments to the administration, including ambassadors, and we found that many of the big donors, not surprisingly, had received an appointment as an ambassadorship. Even though it wasn't surprising, it's sort of well known, and maybe pale in comparison to the things we're saying in Washington these days, it's still nevertheless made for a pretty good story. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was COVID related. There are a couple things that we have done with some of this. Yes?
I just want to throw in one question that just came in related
Sure.
to the last slide on the timelines. Tyler from New Orleans asked, do you create that timeline in Word or some other way?
Well, I like to do it frankly, in Sheets, Google Sheets, because I'll try to get an actual date. And because even if sometimes if I put it in Word, and I'll actually have something out of date. So every once in a while, I actually do a sort to make sure that I have things in the proper chronological order. And you could also do, sometimes if you have other codes in your Google Sheet, you could actually sort in other ways or sort things out. Like, say you have maybe campaign contributions and actions, maybe you want to only look at the campaign contributions. But I'll generally start with a spreadsheet of some sort. Google Sheets works because you could share it with people. Put the date in the first column, sort of an action in the second column, maybe a link in the third column, and maybe some other kind of coding. Word works fine, but I just find it looks a little cleaner in Sheets. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is another compare and contrast related to some of the COVID coverage. The first thing that we did, which I don't have a slide on, but I'm happy to talk to you about, involved some trading that was done involving members of Congress right prior to the pandemic hitting the United States. And the main person that we found was Senator Burr from North Carolina, who happened to be one of the authors of the primary pandemic legislation that was passed about 10 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago, and had a lot of connections within HHS and had maybe a reason to know that something bad was coming. And you can find these in the periodic transaction reports, which I like to use off of Open Secrets. The periodic transaction reports are basically buys and sells of stock. And there's a law called the Stock Act that requires members of Congress to report to the clerk of the House within basically a month of when they've purchased or sold any stocks. They also have to report these annually, but after they pass the Stock Act, which is to stop trading on inside information, to stop trading on congressional knowledge was the acronym it stood for, was meant to sort of see if members of Congress were getting inside information that they then used in order to trade on stocks. We did a lot of analysis actually looking at that around that time, and we found the biggest sales were made by Senator Burr, who remains under FBI investigation. Senator Loeffler in Georgia was also briefly under investigation, but determined that she was kind of cleared by the FBI relatively quickly. The other thing that you can also do, and maybe some of you have done this, is to look for your members of Congress to see if they have actually received a PPP loan. And I understand maybe you've talked about that a bit. So how would you go about doing that? Well, obviously you could put their name into a search engine, and I don't know if you folks have done this. At the Wall Street Journal, we downloaded all of the data and sorted it into categories because it's not available in a lookup at the SBA. But if you don't have that technical ability and you're working more on a shoestring basis, you can use the lookup table that was put together by ProPublica, which is pretty easy to use. And I came up with an example for you by simply looking at a member of Congress. Took a guy by the name of Roger Williams, who's in Texas. I know that we have someone from Texas in here. And this is the Open Secrets page for him. And as you can see, when you get to this page, as I described or talked about earlier, you get a summary which shows his money. This in particular is the page for his financial disclosure, his personal finances is called the PFD sometimes, personal financial disclosure. And they've sorted for you here, assets, liabilities, transactions. That's where you would find these periodic transaction reports that I discussed just a second ago, and then reports and other data. Now, the reports are actually the button that you would want to click in order to find the actual report. And this is an actual link that will take you to the Clerk of the House report that's available online. So it's actually a live link, I believe, and not actually something that's living on the Open Secrets website, which is great because then you know it's a legit doc. and you're going to the primary source information and not relying upon the summary that might have been provided by Open Secrets. Their summaries are very good, but there is a small percentage of error in them. I find errors all the time in Open Secrets data, and I always send them an email, and they always update them and fix them. I'd say they have a pretty much a 98% accuracy rate, but you will find some mistakes. And I always tell people that you should definitely be going back to the primary document. So we go to the primary document, and what you'll see is a list of his assets. And I've just taken a kind of a picture here, and you'll see a company there called First Texas BHC Inc., which seems to have a value of between 50,000 and 100,000. But then you see JRW Corporation and Affiliates, which seems to be a much more sizable entity worth $50 million. Location appears to be in Texas, and the description is a motor vehicle dealer. And we scroll down a little further to see positions, and we see that as a part of JRW Corporation, he is the sole director and the president of that organization. So let's go to the ProPublica site and put in JRW. I just shorthanded it, figuring how many JRWs could there be that are getting PPP loans, and just in case he has other entities with the same name. And when you do that, you get a hit here that looks like a couple of different entities. There's a JRW Corporation and a JRW Logistics Inc. And of course, I would then go back because I didn't see JRW Logistics Inc. on his financial disclosure to see what is that? Is that related, or is it just happen to be the same initials as J, what did we say this fellow's name? Roger Williams. And we click one more time on the data. This is again sorted data, and you can see that it is a car dealership. And there you have basically a story. You go to the member and say, "Oh, I see you got a loan of between $1 and $2 million for their car dealership," and then you can look for your typical potential stories. Did he criticize the PPP? Did he vote for the PPP? Did he want the PPPs to be disclosed? Because many members of Congress voted against disclosing the recipients of these loans. And some of those members of Congress turned out to actually have gotten some PPP loans. And a number of people have done some of these stories. I assume that, but you can't really assume, but I expect a lot of them have already come out. This one actually has come out, but there may be one in your jurisdiction that you haven't found. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention one other place I looked. You know, the members might actually accidentally forget to put the name of a corporation they're affiliated with. And so I like to use a search engine called Open Corporates. Open Corporates is free, and you could put in the name of a person or names of entities. So I would do a lot of searching on JRW Corporation. And what's beautiful about Open Corporates is that it will actually take you to the site where the document is, usually with the Secretary of State, say in Texas. All right, so we're getting close to question time. We may be past that, but I'll show you a slide here that, let's see, is that one up there? Yeah. This is following the campaign cash. A few more things to think about. The campaign contributions, I think maybe Sheila, I'm guessing, went over lobbying. You want to make sure you're looking at the lobby records, which you can find on Open Secrets. Spouse work and business deals. The spouse will be in the personal financial disclosure with usually an SP next to it. So make sure you're looking closely at that. And then also I would search 990s. There's a couple of places that I like to use for 990 searches, which include a citizen audit. ProPublica has a nonprofit search where you can do a complete word search. Some people use what used to be called GuideStar, and I think they merged with the Foundation Center, although that one may be a pay one. Citizen Audit is also a pay one. But what's nice is you can do word searches through and looking for children, jobs, etc. So,
I mean, I just looked around and find the financial disclosure in the Stock Act under the FLRA.gov site. Is is that the best place to get them, or did you say Open Secrets is better to kind of look to find those Stock Act transactions?
Yeah, the place that you want to go, and sorry about the bad lighting here. I tried to fix that for these guys. So the place you want to go, I would start at Open Secrets, because what you really want is to end up at the Clerk of the House report, which is the Legislative Resource Center. And the Legislative Resource Center is really where they have to file the documents. And the Clerk of the House is the one who is the keeper of those documents. And what Open Secrets does is, as well as CQ Moneyline, is scrape those documents and make them available, Open Secrets, for free. And you can find them under the lawmaker. But, the search engines, frankly, at the Legislative Resource Center for the Clerk of the House is not a bad search engine, and you can find them there too. And, like I said, sometimes Open Secrets makes a mistake and they actually are not there. And so you want to make sure that you're going to the original record. So those would be found at the Legislative Resource Center, available online via the Clerk of the House. Interesting thing is that those documents used to not be available to the public unless you actually went into the building, but now they're available online and you can get them through the Clerk of the House. The other thing that you can also find are disclosures by staff members as well. Staff members also have to find those, but those cannot be searched on Open Secrets. Those can only be searched on Legistorm, and Legistorm also has all members of Congress and has staff members as well. And you could find staff members who are also making these trades that could be valuable. So you want to keep that in mind as well.
Okay. So a couple questions. Abby Livingston from Texas Tribune. Why don't more members of Congress have blind trusts, if only to stay out of trouble?
Well, every time I write one of these stories, like we did with Burr and we did with Loeffler, I ask them that question. I'll back up a little bit. So we worked a little bit with Dartmouth University and their economics department, and I think we did one story with them. Dartmouth actually has done a pretty strong analysis looking at whether the members of Congress are trading better than the market. And the fact of the matter is that they're not. They would be better off if they either put them in a blind trust or in a 401k or a traded fund. But my opinion is that members of Congress believe that they're smarter than the average investor, and therefore they want to do the investing. And when you ask them, that they feel like they want to do it. Now, the thing to look for when you're looking for these trades are anomalies that may be different. So let's say they did something routinely, but then all of a sudden, out of the blue, they sell all of their stock, right before a pandemic. Well, that's why the FBI is investigating, to see what he knew and when he knew it, because he was on a couple of briefings that would be there. So, it was interesting. Loeffler is essentially, Loeffler is married to the owner of the New York Stock Exchange, and she was an executive there, and she's a multimillionaire. And so, a lot of these multimillionaires will have their own traders who do, you're paying an individual to do stock trades. And so they may actually be paying a little bit more in order to get some valuable stuff. And it may be better than being in a 401k. And so they feel like they're getting more of their money's worth. But I asked Loeffler that question, and I got kind of silence from because they referred everything to their political staff. And within about a month, she decided to put in everything into exchange traded funds, basically 401ks, or to kind of wipe away any appearance of impropriety. So that really is what all the ethics lawyers will say to you. They'll say, basically, we advise our members that's what they should do, but some of them think that they're smart and they can trade better than, their 401k.
Okay, so we got a question or a comment from Craig Harris at the Arizona Republic. Thanks for the tip on open corporates. I just found out some info on our governor, whom I've covered for 10 years, as governor and state treasurer. So, all right, Craig, when will your story be in the paper?
Yeah. Do I get a credit line?
Yeah. Tagline. Chance Swaim at the Wichita Eagle, is there a reliable resource you use to find accurate information about the business dealings of private businesses that are owned by elected officials?
Sorry, say that again.
Is there a reliable resource you use to find accurate information about the business dealings of private businesses that are owned by elected officials?
Yeah, so open corporates will take you to the articles of incorporation. They'll show you, by the way, you can get some of this stuff as well through Accurate Searches or a company called TLO. They are gathering a lot of the Secretary of State data that's also being gathered by open corporates. But what's beautiful about open corporates is that it's free. So once you have a company name, if they're selling shares in that company, they are usually required. In fact, they all are required to file reports either with the securities, and even for a private company, with the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission at sec.gov, or more importantly, with whoever the agency is that oversees securities in your state. So there's something called NASA, the National Association of Securities Regulators, or something like that. And if you want to find out who that is in your state, you can go to their website and it'll have a link to their page. It might be online, or you might have to file a FOIA. But if Congressman Jones has created a company or is a shareholder in a company, and he or she bought those shares on on whatever status, that would have to be disclosed if it was a kind of a public offering through the securities offering. And each state has a different requirement for what they have to disclose, but you'll often find additional information there. Secondly, you want to go to your local courthouse and see if that company has been sued, as well as on PACER for federal lawsuits. So you want to make sure you're looking at all entities, whether it be your superior court or maybe even whatever the municipal court might be, depending on what the structure is in your state. In big states like California and New York, you'll have a superior court for big cases, or they sometimes, I think in New York, maybe Supreme. In California, it's a superior court as well as a municipal court. I was doing some stories some years ago. I'm thinking about the Washington Redskins, which is changing its name, and Dan Snyder's in the news with a hot story on the New York Times site that just popped up. But I did a story 10 years ago about lawsuits that Dan Snyder filed against his ticket holders when during the 2008 financial crisis, people could not re-up on their tickets and they bought multi-year contracts. And even though they never got their tickets, Dan Snyder was suing them. And I must have looked in 6 or 7 different courts, because the Redskins at the time had a company called Washington Football Inc. They had something called WFI Stadium Inc. In Prince George's County. They had an entity in Ashburn, and you had to look at all of these courts before you could find where the lawsuit was. And there isn't something as good as PACER for searching lawsuits nationwide, but one thing to look at is Westlaw, which is not bad, and they often will have a lot of lawsuits for different states. And there's also a company called Courthouse News that will do nationwide local court searches. Okay. Oh, one other place to think about are foundations and nonprofits. I know that's not the kind of corporation you're talking about, but and also if you're doing business in a city, you might need city permits. We were doing a story about a company called Filikit, which was kind of a fly-by-night company that got a FEMA grant, and it was making test kits for COVID. And I was able to get some information from the local planning office in a small town in Texas by simply calling the city hall and saying, hey, did this company that's doing manufacturing actually get a permit? So don't forget to look at your local city as well, because you could get some information that you might not have thought of. Oh, also, if it's a regulated entity, like whether it be a barber or, anything that's regulated by the state, a energy company. Remember your Public Utility Commission or whatever. There may be other regulatory documents that you can find there.
Okay. Jay Cridlin from the Tampa Times. Are only spouses listed or required to list conflicts of interest? What about children, parents, siblings, etc.?
No, I don't believe that you have to do children, or unless they're dependents, or siblings. So that's worth looking at, but you may have to look harder.
Okay. From Julie Carr Smythe of the AP in Columbus, Ohio. Is anyone aggregating data on foundations from outside the U.S.?
Outside of the U.S., yes, but not globally. So if you have a foundation, or if you have a nonprofit, like I was president of Investigative Reporters and Editors, you still have to be incorporated. So they're incorporated in the state of Missouri, for example. So you can get corporate records there and actually find something. So it's possible you could find something in open corporates that could actually be a foundation, charity, or an NGO of some sort. The only thing I would suggest is that in that country, there may be some filings. So for example, in the UK, there are filings for foundations and charity, and disclosures that are similar that have to be made in the United States.
I do have one more question about the Stock Act. Is the Stock Act any transaction, or any transaction that they're declaring has some sort of nexus with their official activities?
It's any transaction. So it doesn't have to have any connection to any activity at all. It's there because so that there's transparency, and you can find if there's some kind of connection to official action. So, so if you sell, if you own a company and you sell a company, that has to be reported within 30 days. If you have shares in a company and it's not even traded, I mean, it was meant really sort of for stock trading. So back in the day, we had people like Torricelli and who were almost day traders, and Senator Coburn was a big day trader, and they just loved it. I think some of them, it's a bit of a gambling kind of addiction almost. They like to see if they can make some money. All of those have to be reported no matter what they are, and it doesn't have to have any nexus whatsoever to any official activity.
And are they reported in ranges like they are on the net worth statements, or are they precise?
Yeah, so they are reported in ranges. However, a lot of members annually will, if they've got like an account with Schwab, and they're doing a lot of trades, like maybe a lot of people actually do have a trader, and they say, go for it, you just trade for me, and they claim they don't talk to them. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. So there may be hundreds of trades. A lot of them will actually attach the annual statement with all of the trades and the exact amounts. So we love those people, those members. So on occasion, so in the annual report, they'll simply attach the statement, and you'll be able to see everything that they traded. So don't forget to look at the annual report as well, especially if you're looking backwards. And the annual report, would be for the previous year. So although I think they have given them some delays because of COVID, but typically they would have to have been released by now. They're usually due by the end of June, and they start rolling out, I don't know, usually sometime in July. The clerk of the House will announce, I think, releases them kind of all at the same time.